All right, hello everybody. This is Kubernetes SIG Architecture Production Readiness Subproject Meeting for July 14th, 2021. Let's get started. We have the first item on the agenda, Mr. David Eads.
Yeah, so I had a look at what it was going to take to, well, my first thought was, can I just revert the changes back to where we were? The answer is no. There are many changes. They're stacked on top of each other. The code is going to require some, there's a fair amount of work to do. And I have not done it yet. And it is behind other stuff since we aren't going to be using the tool for a while.
Okay, so that's fine. Have you talked to the enhancements subproject that owns that code?
It did not actually occur to me to do that. I had thought that it was...
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, sorry. It had not occurred to me to do that. I had thought that this tool was ours.
Oh, no, this tool started life as something else. And then I shoehorned in the query thing, which I think is fine, but the way the query thing is built is kind of awkward. Like it was built around searching the directories, which isn't really our main thing. We want to search the PRs more than the directories. And so it's kind of backwards the way that the way it iterates through everything. So anyway, or rather, I think the query was in there for something else, and then I added the PRR in. So like we just may want to step back and either rework the whole query function or change to have a specific one for us that just does the functions we need. Doesn't need to be a specific tool, but a specific command that might be helpful. But I have to say, just having the spreadsheet, since we're already tracking things, the idea, I believe, ultimately for the enhancements team was that they would have tooling that could replace the spreadsheet eventually, but I don't know how much progress is being made on that. I haven't made it to that meeting in a little while. So anyway, that's some context for you to think about how much effort you want to put in here. I found the spreadsheet to be super useful, and even more than like running the tool. So
okay.
I'm not sure.
I'm willing to admit that this is probably going to be a back burner project for me, and we will plan to use the spreadsheet next release and see how I like it. Just because having looked at this, I do believe it's going to be a fair amount of work to make it do what I expect it to do.
Yeah. What I would probably what might be better to do is feed requirements to that enhancements team if we think that that the tool can work better than the spreadsheet, or if the tool eventually replaces the need for a spreadsheet because process changes. That would be my thinking is sort of those would be the two reasons, the approach to take for now.
Okay, I'll go ahead and write up a few bullet points on what I found when I was looking through the code and what I see as some of the current shortcomings and what I was going to try to fix. And I'll just leave that in the notes here.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So if there's nothing more on that, we'll go to the second item, the PRR survey. So a little while ago, we had like 20 responses, which was nowhere near enough. So I availed some people with larger Twitter followings to spread the word. And now we are at, I am happy to say, 153 responses, which is actually double what we had for our first survey. So pretty happy about that. I've not done an analysis of the results yet. This is annoying. that people filled in things, because this is like one of the ways I didn't realize we put you can fill it out, you know, other category here. It's kind of annoying because this is really a filter. But looks like, you know, mostly small number of clusters, but and obviously, not surprisingly, most people with relatively small numbers of nodes, but you know, not bad, up to 1,000. And look at this one. I mean, that's 8 with 10,000 or more nodes. That's way more than last time. I hadn't really prepared to do. I hadn't done any analysis on this yet, like I said. But if we want to go through this here, we can. Looks like 119. So the trailing edge, is that the trailing edge of support right now? Or is 118 the trailing edge? Is where most people are. So we asked this last time, and we didn't ask. That's a, you know, 28% had to roll back a minor version in production. 28% of the people who answered, not 28% of the population. So we have to. So that's actually only 11 of 155. So
Yeah,
that's a lot better.
and 8 of them are probably the people who manage large scales.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that level of slicing we can't do. This tool, you know, I have to do in.
We did it last time. Yeah, spreadsheet,
tool.
right? Okay.
Yeah, I export it to what's it called, BigQuery, and then I run a bunch of. I have some. There's like some data analysis tools that we have that I run on it, and then I can slice it that way. Yeah, you're right. Probably 8 of them are the ones who manage either a lot of clusters or a lot of nodes. Of those who rolled back, specific failing components by far the reason, and oh, that's interesting. Okay, that's just okay. I'm recorded here. So this one's, we're going to hit again with 122.
We are. That's going to be big.
Yeah. So this is interesting. What was in 119 that broke things?
We moved CSRs to V1, but we kept the beta level. We added warnings.
That warnings, I wouldn't think. Let's see.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
Docker shim panic. So obviously this requires a lot more analysis. We're kind of just, but here's a preview of it, I guess. Same with patch version, specific components failing. Is the biggest reason. Didn't we have this question for? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, people didn't remember for the most part, or there was some. All right.
Holy cow. Does that say 48 respondents have turned on alpha features in production?
Yes, which is about a third of total respondents, which is, I think, similar to what we saw last time too.
David, by the way, don't you do that? Didn't you do that the same in OpenShift with priority and fairness?
I did, but I mean, I like to think of myself as slightly more knowledgeable in a feature like that than most of the people running clusters. So
Okay,
the trade-off, I think,
that's fair.
for me, was like one of those, like, David personally puts his reputation on the line to enable this because he personally approved the PRs to put this in. And I think there's like order of 5 people in the world who could do that for that feature, right? So yeah,
that's fair.
Maybe people just looked and they realized it, and they're all running OpenShift.
The question is like whether, like, who is responding and whether we don't have like more similar cases where people who were developing the feature because they needed it were turning this on in their production.
That's true. I do remember that one of us wanted. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. If they gave their email, we can actually check that. We can check who are the actual people who enabled this if they gave their email. It's an optional thing, but a lot of people gave it.
Ah, hadn't thought about that.
I think it might be useful.
Yeah.
Can someone take a note of that in the agenda of things we should, any questions that come up as we do this? Take a note of it. That way we can go back and look at it when we get look at the raw data. That's suspiciously the same number as the ones with many nodes or clusters. You know, it's interesting. One thing we didn't put on here. At least in GKE, I know we've disabled certain beta features because, you know, we basically didn't have time to evaluate whether they were stable before we released. So we disabled them to give ourselves time to evaluate them. All right. All right, I'm going slow because I don't want to accidentally get to the question that has emails and then have to go and edit the video later, which I did last time we went through this a year ago. That's interesting, I guess. Pretty good number of respondents too.
That one's interesting too. I wonder if that number will drop, or the are you allowed to rely on beta features after 122 when the great beta cliff comes.
Well, I also wonder if we've moved a lot of things to GA that were sitting in beta for a long time over the last couple of releases. And if those are now available in GA and they were things people needed, they might be able to tighten their policies.
That's definitely what I'm hoping. And that with time limits, things won't linger as long. So
yeah,
this number I'm hoping will drop, hopefully to the point where no one uses beta in production anymore.
I think realistically, if it's enabled, a lot, I mean, you see that when we get to the free form, you'll see a lot of people are like, if it's enabled by default, they're allowed to use it. So there's still going to be a lot of organizations that don't take the time to create that kind of policy and enforce that kind of policy. But look at that. 40 respondents say they're allowed to rely on alpha features in production. I mean, what this goes back, and I think we said this a year ago too, like Tim put out a proposal a year and a half ago, maybe, for maybe doing our alpha and beta in different ways using this lenses idea, right? Where you have to basically, I don't know if it's like put a special header on, you have to do something in your client request to sort of actively say, I want to be able to use beta. I want to be able to use alpha APIs. It only works for APIs, but that might make the decision more explicit than just copying a manifest off the internet that happens to have beta in the version, which I think is what happens a lot these days.
There's actually a way to disable all beta APIs in bulk when launching the QAPI server, which is in bulk. I'll grant you it's not a selective lens, but I think that a lot will adjust once there's realization that beta actually means beta. It will go away. It has a defined end date when it starts. Not can, it will. When it starts, it has an end date, a lifespan that ends 6 releases after it's introduced. So.
Right. It's that API version is going to have to change to beta 2 or to V1, or you're going to be screwed, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the troubleshooting section. So still like I think we saw last time that logs was we saw a similar pattern last time where people still rely pretty heavily on logs. But I think this is probably dictated by the number of clusters they have under management more than anything else. Or I guess whether the problem is something they're seeing across many clusters or in an individual cluster. Anything I know these were particularly of interest to you, David, when we put them in originally a year ago. Anything you're looking for out of this?
I want to compare to the previous numbers. I think
yeah,
that doing that and as a deep dive in a future meeting would be very interesting to me. But my memory is that Kubernetes dashboard used to have a higher number on it, and Prometheus used to have a lower percentage on it. And I'm.
This is obviously a huge standout. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like that progression. If my memory is correct, it has been like a year. So I am going to want to pull up the old and compare.
Be interesting to see what versions people are running that are using Kubernetes dashboard too.
Yep. Elasticsearch is also pretty interesting.
I mean, it's been.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
Hey, it's okay. We're just going over the survey results. I was saying we got over 150 responses this time,
Oh, great.
Which is awesome. Which is double what we got last time, and I hate Twitter. I'm sorry, but I do. And so I don't usually use it, but this time I tweeted it, and then I asked people who are more active on Twitter, like Tim and a few other folks, to retweet it, and that seemed to make a huge difference. So that's good. I hate all social media. I must admit, I don't do Facebook. Ugh.
That is fair. Sorry I was late. I had nonstop meetings from 9 to noon and did not realize that I also had another hour-long meeting right after, because that's just unfair. So I went to take a break.
All right, what reasons to not adopt? We've got 103 responses to this, which is pretty good.
Someone probably needs to summarize these. It looks like a lot of them are just complaining that their providers don't have it.
I like that. Yeah, definitely. This though is going to hit. Yeah, they're expecting it. At least they're clearly on top of it because they know it's coming up. So the ecosystem catching up to API removals. All right, I'm going to move a little faster through these because it's a lot of them. Well, we were saying, Alana, I haven't done any analysis on any of this yet, and what I did last year was take the raw data and put it into BigQuery, and then we can run some things on it where we can slice it by like number of nodes under management, number of clusters under management, which tends to have pretty different patterns, depending on how many. If you've got enough clusters under management, you're gonna be much more likely to do rollbacks and things like that. Here's this again. So the question is, what this coming up over and over again is, raises is what can we do to make that easier? I know, David, you guys in API Machinery have already done a number of things. I think that hopefully will make 122 smoother. So there's, I think, better metrics around it, and then there's the warnings.
Yeah, there are metrics, there are warnings for every individual client that is receiving it. Those have existed for a year at the point in time at which we release, at least 3 releases. The majority of the APIs we are removing had GA versions available in 1.16. So the GA replacement, instead of only being available for a short period of time, has been available for nearly 18 months. And in fact, there are like entire features that don't work using the beta APIs. So we are hoping that people have tried to keep up within the past 18 months to get themselves up to date. And at this point, the theory being that this first one might be bumpy, but once there is actual prior art of beta APIs really do go away when they say they are going to be removed, that people will either be more inclined to wait until they're GA to use them if they have production clusters working on them, or they will be more careful about staying within 18 months of current when they go to try to update.
I remember, I know you've sent out, I think, a couple emails already, right, about 122.
Yep.
but I'm trying to remember the content. Do we have something in there that sort of gives people a playbook of here's how you identify, here's where those metrics are. Here's how you figure out what resources are, still using the old APIs. Anything like that goes beyond warning people that this is coming and tells people this is what you need to do.
There are variances per provider for determining the exact client actually making use of these old APIs, right? The only place where that personally identifying information is available is not in something like metrics, right? It's in the audit log. And so there are audit log scrapers, there are, per cloud provider, there are different tools to use. You can use CloudWatch, parsing through your logs, for instance. And OpenShift has an API for being able to retrieve it. So there's some variance between providers. The metrics that were available were described when we introduced warnings. I guess I don't know that I have reiterated the metrics beyond linking to here are the metrics from the announcement emails. The announcement email was relinked from Twitter. It was mentioned in the community call. It has been sent out to all the lists that we can think of. But I suspect it will still come as a surprise to some people.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Okay, no, I mean, I know, right, each of the cloud providers is going to send out emails to their customers too, but it'll still come as a surprise to people. There's too much inbound traffic for people, and they miss these kind of things. Okay, that's great. I know it's totally on your radar, but let's just make sure we keep the pressure. You talk to, if you haven't already, you probably have, talking to who is it? Contribex that does the comms. There's a whole comms group that has that can also help.
Yep. I spoke to them, and that's how I got the Twitter announcement. I did not trend on Twitter. Okay. I was disappointed. I thought I could be famous, but I will not be famous until someone says, "Oh my God, the APIs are down," and I found the guy who merged it, and then I'll be famous.
It was this guy's idea.
But yes, any other ways you have to expose it would be great, and I would be appreciative. But
by the way, David, that's called infamous, not famous.
I'm not sure that he distinguishes between the two.
Okay. Okay, so some kind of analysis of here, maybe categorizing these into a few buckets of cloud provider support or vendor support versus ecosystem. The two of the biggest things I see would be vendor support, and then ecosystem support when there's, I don't know. Okay, never mind. I didn't want to do that. How do I stop that?
Don't scroll down any further because that's where all the emails are. But I just looked at, somebody responded with yes. No email. So just run yes in your terminal, and that'll get a hold of them probably.
Yeah, that'll work. That usually works. Okay, so that's kind of the broad overview. Let's leave it at that. I don't know when I'm going to have time to analyze this. I'm kind of crammed for the next several weeks at least. So if there's anybody who has spare time, I can spend some time and show you. I assume that the stuff I have, I can share. Like I can share docs. I don't know BigQuery that well, but I've got some queries and some stored procedures that from last time that take the data and munge it up a little bit. Although it's going to be, the data's changed a little bit, so they're not going to be completely reusable. But we'd want to try and do similar comparisons. But I don't know offhand when I will have time to do that. I'd love to put together one, a similar deck, or I wasn't a deck, but I wonder, I have a link to it somewhere. Similar analysis to what we did last time that cooks some of this. And then a comparison. It's a fair bit of work. I can also see if some folks might be willing to, excuse me, to help out with it here. If there's no volunteers on the call right now, because I'd like to put that together, and then we should present that in SIG Arch in general. We never actually presented the analysis last year, I think, because of my negligence. So it would be nice to present it this year and be able to present the year-over-year comparisons. Do I have any volunteers?
Personally, it would be a little easier for me. I'm still ruled by the school year, so it would be a little easier for me if we could try to slice it after the school starts in mid-August. Are you willing to wait that long?
Oh, I am for sure, because I won't be. The earliest I could get to this, if I'm going to do it myself, would be mid-August, based on just demands of my, you know, other parts of my job. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. I think if we shoot for I think it's too late to do a maintainer track thing on it. I guess, I don't know, maybe you guys aren't going to KubeCon anyway. But if we shoot for, yeah, around September-ish for being able to do a readout on it, that would be great, I think.
Okay. I think in mid-August, I will be back with hopefully a little bit more time. And
okay.
I'm interested in trying to learn this new technology called BigQuery.
Have you ever used this not so new technology called SQL?
Yeah, now you're talking my language. Oh man, yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll be able to handle that.
All right, we're good then. Yeah. If someone else wants to pick it up before then, or do it together at that point in time, I'm happy to do it with them.
Yeah, I mean, you and I can. Yeah, I'd be. I certainly, at the very least, need to sit with you for a session, and I need to figure out how to share access to the. I have it, I think, in a particular Google Cloud project, and I would have to share somehow access to that project and figure out how to do that, so that you can get access to those data sets and run queries. And then there's on top of BigQuery, which just does the SQL, you've got this data analysis tool. I don't remember what they call it. It's another Google Cloud thing that you can use to do. That's what I did all the little pretty graphs and stuff last year. But, or you can just do it in a spreadsheet if that works for you. But I'm an old SQL guy, so SQL is a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. How much time do we have? Lots. Okay. Next item. What is this? SLA. I don't know what the rest of these items are.
I can remind, because I think you weren't here for the meeting that we discussed this. So when we did the retro, one of the things we talked about was like, how do we ensure that people are like actually getting their PRR stuff filled out and done in a reasonable, timely fashion? And like, what SLAs do we want to give them? Because we analyzed the data, like we ended up doing most of the PRR like way close to the deadline, and that kind of sucks for everyone involved, and it would be better to space it out. So the idea was, we would send like a KDev email and possibly like, some channel pings or whatever being like, you need to have this filled out. We will take X amount of time to like actually get to it. So if you don't have it filled out until like X amount of time before the deadline, we can't guarantee it's going to get done.
Right. That sounds good.
Because right now there's kind of like there was like a large group of people who basically didn't fill it out until like 48 hours before the deadline, which did not leave us with very much time to actually look at the questionnaires.
Well, it doesn't leave time for back and forth in particular. So it sounds like you're volunteering, Alana.
Well, we wanted to keep it on here, as I recall, to make sure you agreed and that we agreed on a time frame.
Yeah, we need to actually decide on what the SLA would be. I'm fine with doing that. So if you scroll down to last meeting's notes, we have some notes about this. And so the release team is going to make sure that like they're going to be checking. If you scroll down a little bit further, there's some action items.
Okay.
Yeah. So the release team is going to make sure that like they're actually checking the enhancements to make sure they have a little bulleted list, and they're going to make sure that the right things are filled out for the right release, and they're going to poke people about it. But we also need to figure out like what our SLA will be, and then how to communicate that. Because like clearly 48 hours is unreasonable. So like, should that be a week? Like, what do we want to set that to be?
Well, when you say SLA for a first review or for
first review, like how long after like their thing is initially up, how much notice do we expect them to give us? And we will guarantee it will get reviewed
before
in that
the
period
deadline.
of time. Yeah,
right,
because like 48 hours is not enough, and 48 hours is like unfair and uncomfortable and just leads to crunch and other bad behaviors. It would be great if like the thing is, it's not that it's going to take us a week to do each and every single one, for example, but if we say you have to give us a week,
queue, and
that way we can sort through all of them. And
I mean, a week seems reasonable to me. I mean, the reality is I just know that everybody crams these things right up to the end of the deadline, and I expect that week before the deadline, I'm going to have to devote a lot of time to reacting. But for a first review, if we can get everything in a week before, that gives time for iterations, because there's more often than not a couple of back and forths.
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah, there's only been like one or two, I think, that like I haven't actually had blocking comments on.
Yeah. So if we say that, what's that?
I said I like 1 week.
Yeah. So if we say one week, your first draft of it needs to be in a week before the deadline in order to ensure that we're going to get to it in a timely enough manner that we can actually like have an interactive set of reviews. I think that's totally reasonable.
So anything after that, we will call best effort, and if we don't get to it, that's their problem.
Yeah.
Cool. So I can take an action then to work on templates.
Yeah. And I think we need to make it clear that like there's expected to be back and forth. And so a week is intended to give time for back and forth. Like if they submit it at the last minute and it's not good enough, like, of course it's not going to make it, right? The point being, we need to make people see it as a reasonable request, not as a backing up of a deadline a whole nother week when there's already not,
Well, I think it's similar in that sense to like the docs review, right? Like the final docs deadline is blah date, but like the PR is expected to be open by like initial date, and then they're expected to have a draft ready for review by the next date. but the final deadline is
Right.
like the hard deadline. And I think it's going to be similar to that.
It's actually interesting because this is probably a big, I mean, we're talking about PRR review, but I think about like API review, which can be pretty intensive and take a long time. And like, if you're, I guess if you're new to the project, you're not going to get submitting that kind of review most likely. But like, you know, you have to realize if you're putting in that review that like you're asking for time from some particularly busy people and particularly complicated reviews a lot of the time. And like if you do that right at the last minute, you have to expect it's not going to get in. I mean, that's just basic to me. I guess it's just basic open source development knowledge, and we're being a little more explicit about our expectations. I wonder if that would be useful in other types of reviews as well. But that's a different topic, I guess. Okay, thank you. David?
This one's me.
Yeah.
I forgot about that one. So I looked
Yeah, I
at
just
cat
went to
control.
look
I looked
whose
at cat
thing that
control.
was.
I forgot this one.
I think this was just a discussion topic.
It was.
Once John was available.
I think we talked about some of this, like, yeah, I ran into this one too, where it was sort of like, when we talked about, I'm trying to swap back in. We talked about there's a difference between knowing the operator knowing that a feature is working and the user knowing that their feature is working. I, in some of my reviews, was sort of explicit about like that from a metric standpoint, for example, we don't care about user error. Like, I don't want a metric that tells me that these pods can't come up because some user put something stupid in the config. But you need an event for that, potentially, depending what it is. That I want metrics around things where it's system errors, not user errors. I think we talked about this before, though, and I thought we changed the guidance in the documentation around
The
that.
specific example that we discussed last time was, is it okay to tell someone, oh yeah, if you just SSH to the node, you can check it? Because that doesn't scale if you have 1,000 nodes.
Yeah, that was the example that came up there, because we already added the question about how does a user know versus how does an operator know. But
yeah,
there were many where it was SSH to the node and figure it out, and then there was some where it said like, yeah, you SSH to the node and figure it out, but there are fleecing agents to do it. It's like, well, okay, well, which one do you use? Can you demonstrate to me one that actually does this, as opposed to it is theoretically possible that one could exist? And whether there is a level or a bar we think is reasonable. For instance, do we think that is it cAdvisor that the node uses, or that we use in OpenShift to fleece nodes? I think so. So, you know, is that a thing where someone comes in and says, well, give us an example like cAdvisor or cAdvisor itself, and that'll be good enough? Or do we just want to say, okay, SSH?
I really, really want to discourage people from doing anything that requires you to SSH. I don't think it scales. Maybe for alpha, but not for something going to beta or GA.
And so are we going to try to require a canonical example, or would we just say link to either how cAdvisor does this or something like cAdvisor, an agent of your choice?
I think that would be fine.
Okay.
But like theoretically, if their stance is, well, the only way you can find out if this thing is enabled is, you know, if you SSH to the node, It's not like something that's just inherent to the version or something like that. Like we know, oh, it's GA and therefore it must be on in this version. Like that's a reasonable way to know if it's there. But if it's like the only way at runtime you can tell if this thing on is like SSHing to the node, not really a good story.
Yeah, one that came up for me was XFS quota remaining. And I don't actually know if that's reported by CAdvisor somewhere.
I don't think it is. But like, so for example, they could say, well, you know, like SSHing to the node is not actually a solution there, but they could say, well, if you run like say node exporter, then like maybe that exports this as such and such metric. Like that would be very helpful. Just, you know, I don't know. I asked myself, like, how are people verifying these things that they're working on?
Yeah, I definitely think having some agent that's reporting a metric or something is great. So I think there's there's enabled, and then there's, which is what you were mentioning, Elena, and then there's like whether it's working. So like if I run a pod with some special feature, I don't know, like you know, I don't know, user namespaces or something, like how do I know that's working?
Yeah, that
I mean, I
came
guess
into,
effectively, you know, it's working because you look at the pod and you like, but
this specifically
there are
came up
some things.
Huge page medium storage size, because that one did not go through PRR for anything other than GA, and then you know, they really struggled. Like, how do I know if this is working? Or I mean, I guess it's GA, so it's always enabled. But how do I know if it's working? And then suddenly that was like a big question mark. It wasn't something that, you know, had been kind of thought about previously as something that was needed to be exposed. And so I ended up having to work with the author of that KEP to like help them with the question, because like they could not, like a lot of these people are developers, they're not thinking about how somebody is going to actually like monitor and use this at scale. And I wonder if that's something that like maybe we need more help available for people if that's going to be the requirement.
Well, I guess so. What like let's take something like that, or like, or let's say something where we're setting some kernel parameters or something, right? Like, did they take effect? Right? Because you can try and set kernel parameters and they don't take effect for whatever reason, right? Sometimes, and is that something we want people to be able to detect through metrics, or is that something that's low level enough that we're like, F it, we'll just, you know, you got to go. Like it's, eventually there's going to be some application failure associated with it. Like, sure would be nice to know that, you know, you're trying to set the UDP buffer size or something that, and it's not taking effect, which I've had happen, right? Like, but the only way to do that would be whatever code calls to set it, then has to check, did it actually get set? Because sometimes they don't even return an error. And then you're like, is that something that we see as significant enough of an impact that we should propagate a metric all the way up for that? So you'd be looking at your metrics and you'd see like, oh, this is failing to set. I mean, it's certainly an ideal world.
Like,
it seems like what a neat thing to know, but I don't know the scale of number of features that would need this and what overhead that's going to impose and how likely these sort of things are.
I want to avoid like too much metric proliferation because A, there's cardinality costs, and B, I don't want people just adding kind of useless metrics for the sake of adding metrics. So I linked specifically for this one, like this is the example that I mentioned. So like you know, they didn't do PRR in the first round, so they had to go back and fill a bunch of stuff in. You know, like how can an operator determine if it's in use? Well, in this case, like, you know, it's something that you specify in a pod, so you can look at the pod spec and see, like, it's GA, so there's no more like on-off flag.
Right.
What are the like SLIs? So specifically I like went and we said, okay, well, let's go and look at like what cube state metrics gives us. Like, let's not go and add a bunch of new metrics. Let's go see what existing metrics we can use and then like call those out so that people can come back and look at this and be like, ah, I see. I don't have to like dig through a bucket of like 30 billion metrics. I know that this is what
Right.
the author intended. And then similarly, you know, like, how do you set SLOs? And like, what's an example of this? And so specifically, we're like, okay, I don't know anything about huge pages, but like, here is a guide for like how to tune huge pages. It's very Linux kernel specific. It's not Kubernetes specific, but like, at least here's some documentation that talks about how it should be used and what is considered performant, because otherwise nobody has any context. And so we included that, and so on and so forth. And then I think we also talked a little bit about like, you know, you could measure workload performance using things like node exporter. And I think the only thing that we talked about that like wasn't like an NA here is, let's see. Yeah, so like how does one like tune this or like troubleshoot if, you know, it's not meeting SLOs? Like, well, here is how you could potentially tune this. So like trying to make sure that all that stuff is filled in. I don't think that people, like, especially for some of these things that have already gone to beta and they're going to GA now and they didn't go and do any of that PRR stuff, I think it's going to be kind of painful for them to fill these sorts of things out. And so this is the sort of like, because they didn't go back and like have that sort of stuff in mind on the first round. So just maybe a thing to be aware of. Like, I think it's something that we can help them with. I didn't want to be like an unnecessary blocker, but you know, this is not something that really a lot of people have done before, I think.
Right. Okay. I guess for now, this sounds good. We start with this and let's keep an eye on it, see what new cases come up and whether, I mean, I agree that like we want this to be supportable, but we can't instrument everything. And so we have to have some sort of line that's going to be level of reasonable. It's a judgment call, I guess. So I'm, is Kirsten here? Because the last item on the agenda.
She is not, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's just, should there be a prr.yaml template in the template directory? I think people will end up copying it to the wrong place if we put it there.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we point to example PRs. I haven't had a problem with people doing it wrong as much anymore, since we have example PRs for it. I think if it were in the directory that people would put it in the wrong place, it wouldn't do any good. I guess I would say let's go through one more cycle with it as it is and see how it goes, because I think I don't think that's as big of a problem as it was early on when it wasn't documented as well. Okay, we just have 2 minutes left and I have a 1 o'clock. So is there anything else? Okay, well, thank you all very much, and see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.